Show, where we apply the ideas of Ayn Rand to everyday topics. We're a production of the Ayn Rand Center UK. I'm Michael Liebowitz, and joining me today are Matthew Humphreys and Anders Ingmarsson. Am I saying that right?
Yeah, you got that pretty close.
All right. And perhaps Razi Ginsburg will be joining us shortly. We're going to stick to the topic of the Israel-Hamas war. Specifically, Israel is evidently saving and showing footage of Hamas attacks and some of the skirmishes, I guess, that are taking place in Gaza. And we're going to discuss whether that's appropriate or not. And also, we're going to discuss the fact that it looks like Israel is going to be taking over security for Gaza once this conflict is reached its end. So, Matthew, what do you think about that? What do you think about Israel taking over the security for Gaza? Is it a good idea, bad idea?
Well, I think certainly in the sort of immediate aftermath of what's going on now, I would have thought there, whatever ends up happening, I would have thought there needs to be at least some period during which Israel is essentially in control of the territory until they can work out what to do next. Because otherwise, you've just got a situation where there's effectively no authority whatsoever in Gaza, which seems to me is just a complete recipe for disaster. It'll just become a breeding ground for the terrorists to resurface. Clearly, what happens in the longer term, I would suggest, is a conversation that needs to be had afterwards once Hamas have been, as far as possible, been eliminated.
Fair enough. Anders, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm absolutely for an Israeli occupation of Gaza, but I don't think that it'll be a short-term thing, or I hope it will not be a short-term thing, because in this article that was quoted from the Guardian about the British foreign minister cleverly saying that as soon as practical, a move toward a peace-loving Palestinian leadership, which I kind of thought was funny, is the most desired income. But and then they mentioned in the article too, referencing the Palestinian Authority on the West Bank and Bank and Fatah. And well, that is not your peace-loving Palestinians that you want to rule Gaza. So I hope, and maybe probably it's wishful thinking, that Gaza would, or that Israel would rule Gaza for a prolonged period of time until there is evidence that Palestinians can rule that part of their country in a way that is basically run it like any other Western country, and that's a long way away. So I don't see how Israel cannot occupy Gaza for the duration here.
When I read that quote from the British guy cleverly, I just like, are you kidding me? Like, how do people this dumb get into positions of influence and prominence? I mean, you got to be, waiting for the peace-loving Palestinian leadership. You might as well be waiting for Santa Claus, the Easter Bunny, and you can throw in Godot while you're at it. There's no such thing. But actually, Anders, you said you're for an occupation, but they're actually not talking about an occupation. They're talking about just providing security for the area. And actually, Anthony Blinken says that there can be no Israeli occupation of Gaza. And that's actually my next question is it appropriate?
Oh, wait, I have an answer to your first question.
Who's that?
That's Razi. Yeah, I'm audio only today. I hope there's not too much background noise.
You're very what's the word I'm looking for? You're not clear at all.
Oh, all right. Then maybe I'll try to find a quiet place in the oh, all right. Daniel said it's clear for him in the stream.
Okay.
All right. So my point on this, so Netanyahu's comment that they will have a security presence for a while, or however he put it, is one of the better things he's said in the past month. But it's definitely nowhere near enough. Of course, we have to look back at just recent decades and how Israel has gone out of its way to lie to itself that peace is possible and what the result of that has been. So if you go back to the Oslo Accords in '93, it was giving terrorists territories to control and weapons to control them with. And the immediate result was suicide bombing. And then a few years later, the second intifada. And then Israel left Gaza, where they had a military and a civilian presence, with the belief that leaving there and ending the so-called occupation would end the rocket threat to the towns and villages around the Gaza Strip. And that rocket threat has gotten worse and worse over the past 18 years. And I think the end of the so-called occupation culminated in October 7th. So yes, Israel, of course, should go back, occupy Gaza permanently. But as I've said before on the show, Gaza should be very different after the military operation in terms of the population. I don't want to see this idea of Palestinian life in Gaza should end, and it doesn't mean killing everybody, but it means the idea that Palestinian culture can continue as it is. That should be a thing of the past. So yeah, Israel should have a permanent presence in Gaza forever, and the idea of peace should be completely out the window. And of course, military action should be taken once Gaza is dealt with. Military action should be taken in the West Bank preemptively.
Thanks, Razi. So what I was saying is Anthony Blinken from the United States, he says there cannot be an Israeli occupation. He's okay with there being, Israel's going to provide security for the area, but not with an occupation. Is it appropriate, Matthew, for somebody from the United States to be basically issuing dictates about what Israel can and can't do? I mean, this doesn't even sound like a suggestion or advice. It sounds like this is what's going to be. Is that appropriate? And should Israel listen? Matthew, you're muted.
Sorry, is that better?
Perfect.
Sorry, everyone. Well, I would say really it's not appropriate, certainly in the sense in which it's been done, that it is, as you say, it comes across as a diktat for one country to be telling another country essentially what to do. Clearly, the US, the UK, Israel, so forth, they're all what I would broadly describe as free countries. We're all, friendly countries, allied countries. There can be some scope for working together, making, suggestions to one another as to how it's appropriate to proceed. But I think one country telling another this is how it's going to be, I think raises a big number of questions, and in a different context, I suspect the American left would have been kicking off at America doing that.
I think you're probably correct. Anders, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, obviously, what Blinken is saying is having some impact, but he's a diplomat, and as Matthew said, there are political considerations at home to take into account. But I think the quote that we saw from Cleverly, it was kind of non-committal, right? But our view is, here I'm quoting, but our view is as soon as practicable, a move towards a peace-loving Palestinian leadership is the most desired outcome. But I mean, as soon as practicable, that can be 50 years down the road.
Yeah.
No, so I don't give too much credit to that, what they're saying. But again, back to what Razi said, I mean, an occupation is a good thing. It's not a bad thing. An occupation is a good thing. I think that Israel very reluctantly would like to occupy it because it's a hassle, obviously, for them. But I don't really see any other option. So I think, the U.S. occupation of Japan post World War II, I think that could provide a blueprint. But in order to do that, they need someone who has a reverence for a good constitution, which Israel doesn't have, and to put something in place in Palestine, and then kind of slowly but surely change the culture there towards a more Western-friendly culture. Yeah.
Thanks, Anders. Razi, what are your thoughts on this? Are you still there?
Yeah, so I agree with Anders. Israel is reluctantly thinking about occupying Gaza. Israel is reluctant on everything. It's apologetic about wanting to continue to exist, and you see it not just in the statements, but you see it in the way they're fighting it, and the way they're fighting the PR war. I see more and more tweets by Israeli spokespeople about, look, we could have. There was this one I saw yesterday or today about when they were about to target a terrorist, but there were civilians around and animals, not animals and the terrorists or animals, actual animals like chickens and stuff, and they didn't bomb because of that. So, the fact that Israel is reluctant is the reason why Israel is losing. We said, I believe, on October 7th on the show, we said that if Israel actually wants to take any serious military action before the world turns on it, it should be done today, as in October 7th or October 8th. And as far as American advice goes, I think it's always good to look at history of how wars were fought. America should learn from how it mismanaged its own so-called war on terror and its own wars since World War II, and to see how to fight a war properly. Look at how America defeated Japan. That's what Israel should look at when, and Israel, of course, to look at its own way of mismanaging recent wars. So, we should look at this as we should have looked at 9/11 as a lesson of how serious the enemy is and how serious the threat is, and fight it as seriously as the West has fought a long time ago.
Thanks, Razi. We have some super chats. We have Jonathan Honig in for $4.99. We have Bonnie Bertrand in for $5, and she says, why hasn't Gaza been considered just a part of Israel since the 6-Day War? Why call it occupied all these years? Didn't Israel win the war? Good question. I want to get back to that in 1 second. Akira Felix is in for MX $20, and he says Razi is back. He's very excited to have Razi back. So before I get to Bonnie's question, I just want to mention the occupation, because I understand what you're saying, and there's that, yes, we occupied Japan and turned that country around. We wrote their constitution and brought them into at the time of the 20th century. I don't know how commensurate to our. I mean, Japan did have militants. Obviously, they had kamikazes willing to die for the cause. But in the case of Hamas, when you're dealing with religious extremism, I don't know how you can break that. I mean, Israel occupied Gaza from 67 to 2005. So you're talking 38 years. And they didn't change the nature of Gaza. There was still attacks from Gaza, terrorist attacks and whatnot. So I don't know if that's the answer. And I'm not saying that I know the answer. I really don't. And I've been, I've said over and over, I'm just not optimistic when we're dealing with such people as Hamas and, Al Qaeda or ISIL, ISIS, whatever they're called, or Hezbollah. But back to Bonnie, I want to ask you guys, what about that idea? Why isn't Gaza just considered part of Israel? Anders, I'm sorry.
I really don't know that, but just to comment on what you just said before that,
okay.
I'm not optimistic either about an occupation, but I don't see any realistic other options, And
Fair enough.
hard. And I know religious fundamentalists, that's a hard nut to crack. But again, I think there are a lot of people in Gaza who wants to live a peaceful life, as civilians. And once they start to experience that over a number of years, and their kids start to experience it, and you don't have Hamas indoctrinating the next generation and such, it'll slowly start to change. I mean, we have, I don't know how many Arabs live in Israel today. And, I know there are issues, but overall it seems to be working pretty well, and I don't see why it couldn't work the same way in Gaza. So that's my comment on that question. I think I punt on Bonnie's question. I'll let Razi address that.
Okay, Razi, what are your thoughts on Bonnie's question? Thanks,
So
Anders.
we did an episode a few weeks ago. We did an episode on international law and how it's not a thing, but it's a rhetorical tool being used. Matthew, I mentioned on that episode that even though we have you and James, I specifically didn't want a lawyer on that episode because I didn't want to pretend that international law is a thing. And Bonnie is on the I believe, she's on the ARCUK members random WhatsApp group, and on that group, or the politics one, and one of those I posted a link to a Guardian article where somebody from the UN was saying that the UN is violating, the UK is violating international law because of the poverty levels in the UK, which on so many levels is bizarre, because you don't see that claim against African countries or South American countries or Asian countries where there's real poverty. But again, if international law is whatever you want to use to accuse a free country or a semi-free country of, then it's a great tool in that sense. So that's a long way of saying that's why Gaza is considered occupied, because under whatever international law is supposed to be, it is considered an occupied territory.
Razi, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that historical Israel, actually encompassed Jordan as well, right? It's much bigger than what today is considered Israel, right?
Yes, I don't know the exact map, but yes. And I think the original idea of a Jewish state that was agreed upon in 1922, and then things changed after that, also included parts of what is today Jordan. But yeah, Jordan for me is a good candidate of a country that can take in the population from Gaza and maybe the West Bank. So we don't need it to be a part of Israel. But
well, Jordan hasn't been very good to the Palestinians, which doesn't get much mention because everybody's too busy vilifying the Jews. But King Hussein's treatment when he was running things over there of the Palestinian Arabs was not top notch, for sure. Matthew, what do you think about calling Gaza the part of Israel?
Well, I think the reason it's continued, and I'll be careful how I put this, the reason I think some people contend that it essentially has always been occupied by Israel, even after the point in, I believe it was 2005, when Israel forcibly removed a large number of their own settlers out of Gaza and withdrew their own military presence out of Gaza. The argument goes that beyond that point, Israel has retained control of the airspace and the borders and the water supply, etc., and that Gaza has never had a properly sort of independent state, despite having its own government. I'll be clear, I am not endorsing or advocating that view, but that's the argument you usually hear. In terms of actually making Gaza part of Israel, well, I guess that is one option for the longer term. It would involve Israel essentially giving citizenship to the people left residing in Gaza, making them Israeli citizens. I suspect there would have to be a transition period for a significant period of time because of the current culture in Gaza. Is what I would say.
Thanks, Matthew. I would just add, I think part of the issue is the way debates get framed often dictate the outcome. And the debate about Israel, when people repeat things over and over again, for instance, calling them an occupying force or saying it's a colonial power, that then leads to the conclusion, for instance, that when you are attacked by countries, beat them and gain territory, that you're occupying the territory and oppressing its occupants. So that's part of the problem. And I think part of the problem, too, is just a simple lack of knowledge of the area and the history and the people that are there. Yesterday on Facebook, somebody posted that the people that are fighting against Israel are called anti-Semites, but really they're the Semites, which is true. But then it says being attacked by a bunch of white people. The implication being that the Jews that are there today are not descendants of the traditional Jews that live there, but are instead Europeans who have migrated there. So I posted genetic studies that demonstrated that the people who were there actually can trace their lineage back to the ancient Jews. She then switched it and she said, what difference does that make? They're still living on stolen land, which wasn't her original claim, but now she addressed it. So what I told her was, okay, but your original claim is that they were a bunch of white people, not Semites. Given that you were wrong about that, might you not want to reconsider whether you might be wrong about your claim that it's stolen land? And my only point there is that there's just so much misinformation and people don't seem to be willing to adjust their thinking based on accurate information. They have this theme running in their skulls, and that's all that really matters. But before we move on to the next topic, does anybody want to add to this, the idea of the Israel running security or occupying Gaza? Anyone have any closing thoughts?
Well, I have a thought. Well, I want to disagree with what Matthew said about and I don't know if this is your opinion, Matthew, or this is just your understanding of international law and what would be required. But the idea that if Israel occupies Gaza permanently, they have to give citizenship to the Palestinians. No, you occupy Gaza, and your presence there should serve as a reminder to the local population what it is that they, at the very least, supported with their silence, rather, and if not, in many cases, fully supported. So, I think whoever is left in Gaza should be under strict military occupation. If they don't like it, they should be absolutely allowed to leave, not into Israel, but into anywhere else. But yeah, that's my point on that. And also, Michael, if I'm on a roll here, I'm going to disagree with you as well. I wouldn't engage with somebody who said, they were, these are white people attacking a minority. I mean, with that argument, this person tells you who they are, and that they are probably beyond hope.
So you just didn't disagree with my position. You disagreed with the fact that I engaged there at all.
Yes, I'm also disagreeing in a sense with the argument of who cares? Basically, who cares? About some historical fact and of centuries ago, genetic historical fact. I don't think that's that's something to argue against it being an argument, if anything.
Wait a second. So you don't think that the historical claim that Jews have to the land matters at all?
The claim that what?
You don't think that the Jewish claim to historical Israel matters at all? So basically, any European country or any European people or any people on the planet that would have went there and established a country in 1948, you would have been fine?
I think it matters in the sense that that's why they went there. It doesn't matter to me in the sense of why I support Israel. I support Israel because it's the free country, the only free country in that region.
Okay.
And
yeah. Fair enough. Good point, Razi. Okay, this next story, I have to confess that I couldn't read it because there was a paywall. but it basically was that Israel, I guess, is saving footage of Hamas attacks on Israel and battles in Gaza in order to show the public. Gaza, Razi, do I have that correct? Or anybody, Anders or Matthew, if you were able to read the article?
Yeah, I mean, I think the main point being made was that they have obtained and saved footage of the massacre, the initial attack on the 7th of October, and the aftermath. And the question being raised is whether it is necessary to then be sharing that footage, or whether that is actually, in a sense, disrespectful to the people who lost their lives.
Okay, well, so Matthew, is it appropriate and is it helpful?
In the circumstances we have at the moment, where people are outright denying, or seem to be, what plainly happened on the 7th of October, I think, unfortunately, it is absolutely necessary to be sharing the footage and the photographs to demonstrate very clearly what did happen. I mean, I appreciate it's one example, but I saw an interview with a couple of protesters at one of the pro-Palestine marches somewhere, being interviewed, and they were essentially asked, what do they think about what originally happened on the 7th of October, and about Hamas having attacked Israel on the 7th of October. And they were actually literally seeming to be disputing that that had ever happened, and suggesting that they don't believe what went on. Now, I don't know how widespread that view is, but it's just absolutely crazy.
Thanks, Matthew. How about you, Anders? Is it appropriate? Is it helpful?
Yeah, I question its effectiveness, whether it's appropriate, whether it's helpful. It's hard to say. I think it can be, but only in a larger context, where you contrast this with the fact that this is a fight for Western civilization against Islamic fundamentalist totalitarianism, and you emphasize all the values that Western civilization stands for, like individualism versus collectivism, individual rights, free markets, rule of law, etc., and that is the fight, then maybe it can help some people who are easily emotionally swayed and don't have a really firm moral compass, perhaps. Maybe it can be an instrument in helping that. But if you don't do that, I think they may just move on to the next movie that is showing them dead and injured Palestinian civilians in Gaza, and then they're back on that side instead. I mean, a picture is not an argument. I think Dr. Peacock once said in a talk that he gave about abortion. And I think that applies here as well.
Thank you. Razi, what are your thoughts?
So the people that Matthew mentioned, the people in a pro-Hamas rally who are asked about it and deny it, again, those are people, I think they're beyond the pale. You don't talk to such people. There's nowhere to go with them. Sorry. Yeah, you don't go to Holocaust deniers and say, let's have a conversation and go through all the evidence. And here again, the evidence is in your face, and it's not going to prevent them. These videos are not going to prevent them from denying it. They can say, no, this is Dr. Israel did this to their own people to justify an attack on Gaza. It's these people have chosen their side and they're sticking to it no matter what. There's a tweet here that I want to read from Piers Morgan yesterday. He says, the appalling images and accounts of what innocent Israelis suffered on October 7th are utterly heartbreaking. And so are the appalling images and accounts of what innocent Palestinians have suffered since then. If you disagree with any part of this, you have no humanity or moral compass. So I would like people like that to see these videos. I mean, I would like them to see that and then put into context, who is one of the sides when you're saying both sides are bad and both sides are, they have victims, but they're also doing bad things. And then put into context the fact that Hamas shoots its own people when they try to escape, and hides behind them, hides under hospitals, hides specifically under the places that they know Israel won't bomb, because of Israel's actually broken moral compass. So I think those are the people who could be targeted with this. But again, I know I'm repeating myself, but Israel doesn't realize that its primary war isn't a PR war; it's an actual war. And when it does realize that, it'll win, and it might, lose some people who were never on Israel's side in the first place. But that's a price worth paying.
Razi, can you read that quote from Piers Morgan again, please?
Yeah. The appalling images and accounts of what innocent Israelis suffered on October 7th are utterly heartbreaking, and so are the appalling images and accounts of what innocent Palestinians have suffered since then. If you disagree with any part of this, you have no humanity or moral compass.
And do you disagree with that?
I disagree with the intention behind it. Absolutely. I mean, he's not saying, it's horrible what Hamas did to Israelis, and now it's horrible what Hamas does to Palestinians.
Okay.
He is, he's basically, yeah.
Because the quote itself doesn't say why it's appalling what's happened or who's responsible for what's happening to the Palestinians.
Well,
because I think it's appalling too, but I put the blame on Hamas, not on Israel.
Yeah, so it should be made clear.
I mean, it's a massive context dropping by Piers Morgan on this. Again, a picture is not an argument. You have to put it into the broader context here, as I mentioned earlier. And Israel is in the right, and yes, Palestinians, civilians will die and be injured, but it's all on Hamas, and they could end that tomorrow by unconditionally surrender. But I don't know what Piers Morgan thinks about that.
I don't either, and that's part of the problem is I don't know that he's blaming Israel. Given what the media usually does, I would assume so. But just a quote on its own, I don't really take an issue with, unless he's implicitly blaming Israel for what's happening to the Palestinians.
So he is.
Go ahead, Razi. Sorry.
Yeah, just to say, Piers Morgan is pretty consistent on kind of blaming both sides for the.
Okay. I didn't know that. I'm sorry. Okay, that certainly gives context to the quote. If he's already on the record blaming Israel and drawing a moral equivalence, then yes, Razi, you're absolutely correct. I actually agree with Razi on this whole idea of a PR war. And that's why I don't mind if Israel saves the photos, or saves the videos. That doesn't bother me. But when it's done because you feel like you constantly have to justify yourself to people with whom you're never going to be justified. The people that are opposed to Israel are not going to come around based on footage. They're not even going to come around based on arguments. They hate Israel. They hate Jews, and that's all there is to it. So I think Israel would be better to stay away from that PR war. I do think to an extent it matters what other countries think, and so you ought not to go out of your way. They shouldn't deliberately go to places where Hamas isn't and butcher civilians. I mean, you have to be, concerned to some extent, but to do this just to basically to say to other countries or other people, look, we're not that bad after all. I don't think those other countries are going to buy that. Well, what do you think, Matthew, about Razi's point that I agree with, that Israel should be fighting a war and not a PR war?
Well, I agree. It's not a PR war. At the same time, at the end of the day, the evidence of what took place should be out there. I understand what you're saying. There are certainly many of these people. They're just dead set against Israel. They're not, they're not going to be persuaded. We're not going to get through to them. I take your point on that.
Thanks, Matthew. What do you think, Anders, about the PR war? Should Israel be waging a PR war?
Well, I don't know that you can separate the two fully because I think PR is an integral part of war. So, I definitely agree with Razi that Israel should focus on fighting the quote unquote real war, but PR is part of it, whether you like it or not. And just to make clarify what the article. So the article was not about trying to convince quote unquote Holocaust deniers that they're wrong. The article is about, that they have had a screening of it in Los Angeles, and a lot of celebrities, I think, were invited and came, and then they have another screening planned in New York and things like that. So I think they're trying to target influencers that perhaps are mistaken, if you like, or so. I don't think they're going for the hardcore deniers, not at all. So from that point of view, in the context of PR being part of the war, yeah, I don't know if it will work, but I don't necessarily see that. I mean, it may be worth trying.
Fair enough. I mean, I guess that's true. In an isolated instance, I suppose it doesn't cause any harm. My only concern is if Israel is out there trying to convince everybody in the world that they're the good guys, when the people that think Israel are the bad guys generally aren't going to see them as good guys, no matter what they do. I got actually a question. Go ahead, Razi.
Yeah, I should say, yeah, I agree with Anders. There is a PR element, and of course, I'm not against doing some PR. What I'm against is, and we talked about this when Israel did that press conference, showing that the Hamas headquarters are under Shifa Hospital in Gaza, something that was known for a long time, and that's it. Like they didn't act. So if you bomb the hospital, as they should have, and then do a press conference showing what was under the hospital that made you have to bomb it, that's one thing. I think Israel is, as I said, they're only fighting a PR war in a sense. I mean, or they're fighting the war, the actual war, but insufficiently. So yeah, that's where my issue is. The primary goal is to win militarily, and then PR can be in addition to that.
I think you're right, Razi. And Anders, thank you, because I think you helped me to clarify my position, because my thinking was a little muddled on this. I think the point is that you don't want to make winning the war subservient to winning PR. PR shouldn't be your primary goal. Winning the war should. And if you have to choose between the two, you win the war and don't worry about PR. I think that actually, I thank you, because it helped me to get it clear in my own mind. So I have a question that's on topic, but it's off the footage topic. How does everybody see this thing ending? I mean, I know none of us really know, but on October 7th, if you would have asked me, I would have thought that Israel was going to eradicate Hamas. I no longer think so. I really don't. I think that on their way to eradicating Hamas, the death toll is going to rise so high that they're ultimately going to cave to international pressure, and we're going to return basically to the status quo. That's what I see happening. I want to start with Razi on this. Razi, what do you think about that? I mean, you're from Israel. You know more about it than certainly me and probably all of us. Do you see a good ending for Israel in all this?
No, and I hope my connection is good, because I'm using airport Wi-Fi. But yeah, I think we may have said this on October 7th. We definitely said this on October 8th or 9th when we had an episode titled, and this pissed people off, but we titled it "Why Israel Can't Win," and that was my title. And this is why I knew immediately that what Israel would do would be something like this. It'll be a stronger military operation than previous ones, but not one sufficient to destroy the enemy. Israel will care more about what the world thinks, and no. So there was no point at which I thought I thought this was another nail in Israel's coffin on the day it happened, and I think that's proving itself. It's proving to be the case.
Thank you very much, Razi. Anders, what are your thoughts?
Well, I'm still perhaps naively optimistic that Israel will take care of Hamas. When it comes to future occupation, I'm not sure they have the will and the stamina to see that through. So that's the next question. But I still hold out, hoping that they will root out Hamas from Gaza.
Thanks, Anders. Matthew, how about you? What are your thoughts?
Uh, Similar to Anders on this issue, I think. I mean, I would like to hope that Israel are going to be able to do it. I have a feeling Razi's probably right that they are going to end up sort of caving to pressure and stopping short. But certainly so far, it has to be said, Netanyahu seems to be holding firm. He's persistently refused, calls for a ceasefire and said he's not even contemplating it until the hostages are released. I was initially expecting he would have caved already after this many weeks in, but I guess we'll see what happens.
Thanks, Matthew. And we have from Robert Nasir, $5. He says, "You're not just trying to reach your allies nor your enemies. You're trying to reach thinking people who are open to evidence and information." And from Megan Ribbons, we have $2. She says, "PR equals I'm thinking of the John Galt line press conference. Thank you both." To Robert's point, I'm usually in agreement that you want to reach out to people that are thinking and open to new information. And I largely, or to some extent, agree with him here. I just don't know how many really thinking people are out there that don't already have a viewpoint on this subject. Like, I don't know how many people don't know the facts of the case and that would be persuaded by that. Does anybody think there are a lot of people out there to be persuaded one way or the other that are, objective thinkers that are gathering facts? Anybody can answer it. It doesn't matter. Anyone?
Yeah, I think so. I agree.
You do?
Agree with Robert. Yeah, I think it's a pretty large, more or less silent majority who are kind of watching the tennis match between the extremes on both sides, and if they are faced with some rational arguments, I think they're open to being convinced one way or another. If these particular videos are what is making it, I don't know, but if it helps some to see the light, then hey, it's good.
Thank you.
Yeah, I agree with Anders. I think if somebody is just getting their news from the BBC, without necessarily agreeing, but accepting that is what the BBC is reporting is the situation, or any similar news outlet. Then I think there are more people who are the pro Hamas side is very loud. They block the streets. They tear down posters of hostages. They do things that put them sort of front and center. But they're, at least those people are not a majority anywhere, except in Arab and Muslim countries. So yeah, I think there are more people, but the people who are persuaded by the BBC coverage or that type of coverage are a disappointment to me as humans. I'd expect more of them. So we might be able to convince them, but they should do better generally in how they think.
Don't get your news from the BBC. Matthew, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, I think I agree with Razi. I mean, I do watch BBC News, but I watch several other news channels as well. I wouldn't just purely rely on the BBC for coverage of anything.
Nice. All right. Before we close out, does anybody have any closing remarks they'd like to make on the topic or any of the topics we've discussed? Razi, come on. You got to have something. Oh, go ahead, Anders.
Yeah, don't watch too much news. It's not good for you.
No, it's not. Razi, anything? Oh, nothing from Razi. Okay.
Yeah, sorry, my connection is not great. I did want to point out that there was, so Israel is going to do like 4 hours of a humanitarian pause, and I didn't understand if it's going to happen every day or just today. But yeah, we know how this humanitarian pause. It's a one-sided pause, and it's another step that Israel is taking towards basically backing out of the commitment it made to defend its citizens.
Good point, Razi. Daniel, what announcements do I have to make? No, Daniel. Anybody? I don't know what announcements to make.
I can make the announcement.
Okay,
The Daily Objective
thanks.
is back tomorrow, 5:30 p.m. UK time, 12:30 Eastern, followed by the reality show at 6 p.m. UK time, 1 Eastern.
All right. Thanks for bailing me out, Razi. It was very uncomfortable for me for a few seconds there. Well, for now, thanks everybody for joining us. Thank you, Anders. Thank you, Matthew. Thank you, Razi. And in honor of Mark Pellegrino, whom I interviewed on my podcast, The Rational Egoist, recently, remember, always check your premises. Thank you.